You're in for another wild story. Today's journalistic abomination is from the BBC. This article is very important for two reasons. One, it uses deceptive techniques that people should be aware of when consuming the news. Basically, it's a propaganda masterclass. Two, although the article is 2 years old, people are still linking it on social media, as if this is the ultimate authority on conspiracy theories. A search on X shows page after page of tweets that link the article, some very recent. Most just link the article without comment. Maybe they're bots, but I'd say they're people that have never read the Great Reset book and just let the BBC do the talking for them. The lies start right from the title. What is the Great Reset? The BBC says it's an initiative. Well, what is that supposed to mean? In fact, The Great Reset is a book written by Klaus Schwab. But look how far you have to get in the article before the book is even mentioned. The BBC doesn't tell a reader that the book was written by Schwab. Instead, Schwab is only identified as the other co-founder of the initiative, the first founder being the Prince of Wales. Co-founder because he appeared in a clip in a 1 minute 57-second video about the Great Reset that he didn't even narrate. In fact, there's only one brief reference to Charles in the 280-page book, when it praises Charles and Andrew Cuomo. Yes, that Andrew Cuomo, for building it back better. But the greatest sin of omission is that the BBC doesn't even tell its readers the full title of the book. COVID-19, The Great Reset. Then the article relentlessly attacks people as conspiracy theorists for linking the Great Reset with COVID. It's part of the title! The BBC doesn't tell its readers that the book supported all the lockdowns and actually criticized national leaders for not having more coordinated worldwide lockdowns. The last third of the book gaslights the readers to be thankful for the lockdowns, claiming COVID offered us the gifts of more time, greater stillness, more solitude. The book tells us Shakespeare wrote plays during the plague, and Pushkin's best work came during a cholera epidemic. Let's go back to the start. Propaganda demonizes opponents. Hijacked is a good word choice, as hijackers are evil, essentially terrorists. The goal, of course, is to appeal to emotions, not reason. And the term conspiracy theorist is an offensive smear. It's saying the theory isn't just incorrect, it's a lie, a fabrication, and the theorists are crazy or delusional. Another red flag is that no author is named. Easier to lie when it doesn't hurt your reputation. Be leery of articles quoting anonymous sources, or articles that say, according to experts, if the experts are unnamed. Like, wouldn't you want to know the name of the top scientist that said the world was supposed to end by June? And in this article, the alleged conspiracy theorists are anonymous. Dehumanized. Boogeymen, not human beings. And you can't research them to see if the BBC portrayed them fairly. This part is interesting. It says the plan is light on specific detail, the scope is huge, and it has a lack of clarity. So BBC is saying it's badly written, but then blames the critics for not interpreting it like the BBC. And we don't even know if anyone at the BBC actually read the book. It's difficult to see precisely what the Great Reset might mean. Note the indirect language. It is difficult to see, rather than I can't see, or it is difficult for the BBC to see. Or even here, there's a book, rather than Schwab wrote a book. This section gives some balance. It talks about legitimate criticism of the Great Reset, environmental policies could hurt the economy, questions about whether unelected people should have the power to transform the global economy, concerns about the impact of technology on civil liberties and jobs. All positive, right? It's not all bogus conspiracy theory. It's legitimate criticism. But wait, look at the header. It contradicts the text. So people who skim the article might see a conspiracy theory is born and easily miss the parts about legitimate criticism. However, if you accuse BBC of bias, they'll just point to the two paragraphs and say, hey, we cover both sides of the debate. It's a common fake news technique. And put the propaganda in the headlines, photo, and opening paragraph, and put the necessary facts much later in the story, so that skimmers are more likely to miss them. Let's look at some sleazy photo tricks. Or remember those Twitter links? Now let's look at the thumbnail. A group of people, BBC News, and this woman with the Great Reset sign, the poster girl for the hijackers and the Great Reset conspiracy theory. Oh wait, she isn't protesting the Great Reset. There could be hundreds or thousands at this rally, And this man may be the only one protesting the reset, but BBC uses him to misrepresent the whole group. The same tactic was used in the Canadian Freedom Convoy. The fake news photographed one guy with the Confederate flag to say the whole convoy was filled with white supremacist hate groups. They didn't report that he was quickly asked to leave.
We called him out. He knows. He's going to hold his head in shame now.
And here, instead of saying BBC News, it says Getty Images. So this is a stock photo. BBC wasn't there, never interviewed any of the people pictured, doesn't know the name of the man with the sign, or why he opposes the reset, so they have no information indicates he believes in a conspiracy theory. He might have the legitimate concerns the BBC listed. What's the word when you make judgments about people without having any information? And BBC conveniently cropped out these signs from the Twitter thumbnail. This is Jacinda Ardern, then Prime Minister of New Zealand. And surprise! BBC doesn't say anything about her in the photo caption. Schwab praised her in COVID-19, the Great Reset. And in his sequel, Stakeholder Capitalism, Schwab spends 6 pages praising her willingness to crash the economy with lockdowns. In fact, in August 2021, she locked down the entire country for exactly 1 COVID case. Later, she blamed cows for global warming and imposed a cow burp tax on farmers, basically going to war with the country's leading industry. She resigned this year when she was polling at 29% support. So it's a disgrace that BBC demonizes Ardern's critics as crazy conspiracy theorists hijacking a good cause. Justin Trudeau made a speech. I'll show you a clip in a minute. The BBC wants you to believe that everyone who reacted to that speech on Facebook is a conspiracy theorist, and that the spike in November on the graph proves that Trudeau's speech stoked the tinfoil hats. In fact, BBC has no idea what was said in those posts. Many of them might actually support the Great Reset. The chart will fool most people. Visually, the November spike is impressive. But there are 3 billion monthly users on Facebook, 2 billion every day. So 34,000 Facebook posts are negligible. And even assuming the 23,000 extra posts from October to November were all Canadians, it's still a tiny amount for a country of 39 million people. There were probably more Canadians on Facebook talking about Taylor Swift. BBC gave readers a box to click to watch Charles' video. And no link is offered for the Trudeau video, which they don't want you to see, as it mimics Schwab saying the pandemic represents an opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset for a more equitable and prosperous future.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
So in November 2020 in Canada, people were dying of a new disease. Businesses were closed. Billions upon billions of stimulus had been spent so that people thrown out of work could pay rent. Most government employees were working from home for fear of spreading the disease at the office. And Trudeau picked that moment to say the pandemic was an opportunity to embark on new climate change projects and completely revamp or reset government programs. Incredible! And any Canadian questioning the wisdom of this is branded a conspiracy theorist. Damn you, BBC. Here's a bad joke. It's unclear whether he was referring to the WEF plan.
I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young noble leaders of the World Economic Forum.
Still unclear? On the WEF website, we see Canada's finance minister and deputy prime minister is on the board of trustees. In his book, Schwab talks about not letting the COVID crisis go to waste and praises the EU for using the crisis to advance the green agenda. Though he doesn't tell you the plan involves cutting food production through quotas and restrictions on fertilizer use, forcing farmers off their land, and culling livestock herds. And as we watch Trudeau openly say the pandemic is a pretext for environmental policies, BBC says some claimed, letting hateful readers believe that those claims were just lies. Unclear, and some claimed, are attempts at obfuscation, or in Croc terms, muddying the waters, which is followed by guilt by association. BBC wants people to transfer their dislike of Donald Trump to critics of WEF. Share the hatred. And they provide no evidence of even one person connected. 75 million voted for Trump, so even if their claim were true, thousands of Trump supporters represent a tiny fraction. But most important, critics were right about radical climate policy. Biden nixed the Keystone Pipeline on day one, banned some oil drilling. His climate czar John Kerry is a big fan of the Great Reset and is now pushing to cut food production to cut emissions. Conspiracy or not, people will go hungry as a result. The guilt by association resumes with a hypertext link to this article that has nothing to do with the Great Reset. BBC argues that a nefarious group of people who had never met before, including tourists, a granny with breast cancer, and a guy with a Viking helmet, left their guns at home and went to the capital to overthrow the government. Sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory. Honest reporting gives both sides of the story. This isn't honest. People are smeared without being given a chance to respond. A BBC doesn't tell a reader that J.P. Sears is a comedian. Now, they won't distinguish between conspiracy and joke. They also don't tell you that a satire about own nothing and be happy is based on a serious video that the World Economic Forum produced and ran on its website for years. Franklin Graham doesn't mention the Great Reset, but he's lumped in with the conspiracy theorist hijackers. It looks like anti-Catholic bigotry that the BBC accuses a bishop of being a conspiracy theorist without actually showing his letter or letting him defend his views. It's just more guilt by association, smearing Great Reset critics by associating them with Donald Trump and religious conservatives, and then smearing Trump and religious conservatives by associating them with the alleged conspiracy theorists. Circle of hate. Oh, by the way, in the book, Schwab calls patriotism and religion a toxic mix. Sounds a bit intolerant to me. This tweet is cut off in case the reader might agree. As for global surveillance, for years WEF has openly pushed the central bank digital currencies, which would allow governments to monitor every cent you spend. The book calls for more funding for the WHO, so it can monitor patients around the world. It talks about contact tracing systems being used for non-medical purposes after the pandemic. Schwab's previous book also touted emerging surveillance technologies. And the BBC surely knows that their ex-PM was a WEF superstar who pushed medical passports, digital IDs. Now he wants digital libraries, so your medical records could be available to people anywhere in the world. You might remember that Tony Blair is among the most notorious conspiracy theorists in history, pushing the bogus claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and leading the United Kingdom into a war that killed 400,000 civilians. Tweet about Trudeau, BBC condemns you. Destroy a country, get a free pass. This section is funny as it uses the classic crock techniques, starting with the nameless experts. Experts of what? Have these people even read any of Schwab's books? The book came out before the COVID vaccines, so any discussion of vaccines has nothing to do with Great Reset criticism, although the BBC uses guilt by association to transfer readers' hatred of anti-vaxxers to Schwab critics. The theory that evil microchips are embedded in vaccines is so ridiculous it must be a joke. We've already seen BBC doesn't recognize humor. Once again, it's a straw man fallacy. Can't win a fight against a real opponent? Create a straw man, it's easier to knock down. Don't debate the Great Reset. You'd have to read the book first. Just misrepresent the opposition and lead the reader to click on the irrelevant straw man of choice. Lies right to the end. BBC claims the Great Reset emphasizes green infrastructure, but there was only one sentence on the topic in a 280-page book. Schwab and Malloret spent more time talking about the George Floyd riots, how bats and pangolins caused the epidemic, and why few stage plays were written about the 1918 flu epidemic. The lack of emphasis is why BBC earlier described the reset as vague, light on specific detail, lacking in clarity, and it's difficult to see precisely what the Great Reset might mean in practice. And they say this meme is frightening.
That's gonna scare you, believe me.
Memes aren't as frightening as reality, like politicians intentionally creating food shortages. There's an earlier BBC article that proves that the fact-checkers can be the worst fake news propagandists. The BBC says the Great Reset criticism is a baseless conspiracy theory, But remember, the previous article outlined legitimate criticism from a variety of sources, and their list isn't even complete. For example, it omits how West-style globalization aims to bypass national democracies. This article makes no mention of the book. Here, the Great Reset isn't just a plan, it's a genuine plan. Despite being vague, light on specific detail, having lack of clarity, and it's difficult to see precisely what the Great Reset might mean in practice. The biggest lie of the article is the plan explores how countries might recover from the economic damage caused by the pandemic. The book argues the opposite. Schwab calls on people to lower consumption and shrink the economy for the sake of the planet. And the ultimate goal is degrowth, the equitable downsizing of the economy, leading to a future where we can live better with less, especially if it comes with depopulation. And the BBC gaslights its readers into believing Justin Trudeau has nothing to do with Schwab or the Great Reset.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
It even gives Trudeau a platform to smear critics for disinformation. And it goes on with more Trump derangement syndrome, guilt by association, strawman fallacies. It's supposed to be a fact check, but it's 7 pages of opinions aimed at hiding the facts. There's a mention of masks, but no clinical studies quoted. I'll let the viewer decide which of BBC's conspiracy theories turned out to be spoiler alerts. To learn more about the Great Reset without having to read the book, click my book review playlist on the top right. Cheers.